Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 195th New Social Environment. I'm Henry Addison, a production assistant here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Robert Wilson, Willem Dafoe, and Charles Shafaieh. We're also thrilled to have the poet Annabel Lee here, who will read to close today's program. Today, we'd like to highlight the Watermill Center, which Robert established in 1992. We'll share links in the chat to provide more info on this interdisciplinary laboratory and share how you can support the center by making a donation or following them on social media. To begin, I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation, the traditional owners of Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters on which we stand. Finally, the Brooklyn Rail stands in solidarity with the uprisings in response to the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McAtee, James Scurlock, Jamel Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, Rhea Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, Toyin Salau, Walter Wallace Jr., and countless others we have lost to white supremacy and police violence in this country. We would like to remember the life of Brandon Bernard, who was executed by the state last Thursday, December 10th, after spending more than half of his life on death row. We acknowledge that justice for all of these lives will come from the streets, from the nation demanding accountability and refusing to move on until Black Lives Matter in the eyes of the state. Before I introduce our host, we'd like to begin with a brief moment of silence. Thank you. Our host today is Charles Shafaieh, an arts journalist and critic whose writing on theater, visual art, literature, film, and music have appeared in numerous international publications. Originally from Montana and now based in New York City, he writes regularly on opera and on architecture. With the Brooklyn Public Library, he co-curates Lit Film, an annual film festival focused on writers. Charles, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Henry, for that. And thank you to Bob and Willem for joining me today and all of you around the world for this very unique conversation, because that would never have happened probably because of both of their very, very busy schedules. It would not have happened in person. And to just introduce two people who don't need any introduction, but for over 50 years, Bob Wilson has changed how we see, hear, and experience the world and our own lives through theater, opera, drawings like the one you can see behind me here, art installations, design, and much more. Born in Waco, Texas, he moved to New York in 1963 to study architecture at Pratt Institute, and since then has created such diverse works as Einstein on the Beach, Heiner Muller's Hamlet Machine, Strindberg's A Dream Play, and has collaborated with as wide-ranging of artists as Lady Gaga, Tom Waits, William Burroughs, and Christopher Knowles, whose words I believe we'll hear later at the end of this conversation. He's also the founder, as Henry noted, of the Watermill Center in Long Island, which serves as a space for the creation of his own works, as well as those of countless artists in residency. And Willem Dafoe, as many of you most likely know, is has been the star of over 100 movies, from Platoon to The Last Temptation of Christ to Shadow of the Vampire and At Eternity's Gate. But the four-time Academy Award nominee began his career in experimental theater. Coming to New York City from Wisconsin in 1976, he was an original member of the Wooster Group, an experimental theater company in New York, with whom he worked for 28 years until 2005. And with Bob, he has performed two productions, The Old Woman and The Life and Death of Marina Abramovich. So thank you again for joining me. And I had mentioned to both of you yesterday the kind of impetus of why I wanted to get both of you together, and the history that you share in theater in New York and in the arts broadly, to ask a question of everyone and of yourselves, that, as Bob, you say, that to ask the role of the artist is to ask questions, and the pandemic that we're all dealing with has inaugurated a question that, provocative and as it intentionally is, people maybe, I think, should be asking again, provocatively, why should theater come back at all after the vaccine and everything goes back, quote unquote, to normal? So Bob, maybe you could start.
Well, I think everything will be different, but it's all the same. It'll always be the same. Oh, that there is a need in man, I think, to congregate, and it's since ancient times in these forums that we call theater. I see it as a continuing of what's been there in the past and will be there in the future. A tree that sometimes loses its leaves, sometimes it's in a storm, sometimes it has new leaves, but it's the same tree. So I think as long as man is living, there'll be this need to come together in these forums. And the wonderful thing about theater is that ideally people of different backgrounds, different natures, different political backgrounds, social backgrounds, economic backgrounds, people with high degrees of education, people with no education, can congregate and come together for an exchange of ideas. And I think it's in the nature of our psychic mind, this need to do so.
Willem?
Just, Bob said it, but it's simple. For me, we're social animals. And something about the theater, there's all kinds of theater, but basically, you're at a live event. And the quality of being there is unmatched by so many other ways we receive information and entertainment and distraction. So it will always be special. And I know for me, as a spectator, I remember things in the theater more indelibly than I do things that I've seen, in movies. And that's even without repeated viewings. Something about the quality of being in the same room with an event that's live and could go anywhere is always going to be a test and a challenge for us and our senses to go to a place that we can't control. The idea of going to a theater, it has a different kind of commitment where so much of what we receive now, we can control, and it gives us a false sense of freedom. But when you go into theater, you're kind of collaborating with a lot of unknown factors. And I think that is something that people that are trying to have new experiences and challenge, conventional thinking are always going to go to that place.
The kind of idea of challenging conventional thinking was something you weren't. Oh,
well, I mean, conventional thinking is just anything to break the lockstep, of a predetermined or life that's full of habits and just not something to keep you alive.
Mm-hmm.
I always think of that sign in casinos that say you have to be present to win.
But I mean, both of you have talked about, in terms of when you came to New York, that the things you were seeing in many respects on Broadway or in certain theaters were things that dissatisfied both of you, which is what led you, Willem, to the performance group and later the Wooster group, and then Bob to start your own Bird Hoffman School for Birds. And so I wonder if there was if you could talk about from a historical perspective, in the 70s, and for Bob, you in the later 60s, what it was that you were seeing that dissatisfied you, and then what that you both started in your own respective ways that did provide some sort of fulfillment, and also compare that maybe to what's happening today if you go to Broadway or anywhere else for that matter. Maybe Willem, you want to continue that?
Okay. You know, I came to New York with very little training, and I had worked with a small self-run little theater with our own space in the Midwest. But I came to New York because that's where the action was. I remember there was a small press bookstore in our little theater, a very good one, actually. So when I'd have downtime, I'd always be reading. I remember the Drama Review or various things, and I'd be reading interviews about work that was being done in New York. And that always fascinated me. But the truth is, when I went to New York, I went really intending initially to become a traditional, you know, seek traditional theater employment.
Mm-hmm.
And I never got around to it, because when I got to New York, I just found myself always going downtown and ending up at performances rather than, you know, traditional theaters. I was very attracted to dance. And I just found that I was living downtown, and I didn't have a career path. I suppose I was ambitious enough, but it wasn't for.
Nope. And we may have lost connection with Willem. In the meantime, maybe Bob, you might want to continue that question about what you were dissatisfied about, and
Well, when I came to New York from a small town in Texas, I had never been to the theater. So I went to see Broadway shows and didn't like them, and still don't for the most part. And I went to the opera and I didn't like that either so much. But I saw the work of George Balanchine in the New York City Ballet, and I liked that very much. And I liked it because of the mental space. I was especially attracted to the abstract ballets of Balanchine. I was attracted to the classical patterns, that I could listen to music and visually watch classical patterns. And I think, Charles, to put it simply, there was time to think. And I didn't have that kind of space when I went to the theater, to the opera. I often felt that when I went to the theater that it was too complicated. I had to figure out what some director was thinking, or what some actor was thinking, before I had my own thoughts. And I never was really interested in psychology. It seemed to me so artificial to see an actor trying to act natural. It seemed so artificial. And I liked the work of Balanchine, the New York City Ballet. It was formal, and they didn't try to act natural. It was something presented formally, and in a strange way, it looked more natural. And then after I saw the work of Merce Cunningham and John Cage, and Cunningham's ballets were constructed in time and space. And there was no narrative. And again, there was so much space, so much time to think whatever I wanted to think. And I was curious that the music and dance work separately. So what I was seeing was not a decoration or an illustration to what I was hearing. And so I'm a visual artist. And, so I always felt that what I was seeing was as important as what I was hearing. And that theater shouldn't, the visual book of theater should be as important as the audio book. So I came more from the visual side of looking at theater, I was more interested in architecture and painting. And later, when I started to do my work, these were the influences I had. Willem and I worked together, and tell you, I usually, very often I start with silence and listening to the silence, and the sound will come from there. I very often will stage a work with movement or visually, and then maybe add the audio. I work on them separately, independently, and together, but the visual book is not just a decoration. So the things that I saw when I came to the theater and the art group that I didn't like are the reason I guess I did what I did in the theater.
Hi again, Willem. We saw that
I guess I got the hook. What's going on, maybe? Where was I? No, but I caught up with what Bob said, so take it where you will.
So I would just maybe to continue on his thought with you in terms of what then did the Wooster Group provide that, I mean, Bob, he was looking for space, but,
Simply, I remember seeing Rumstick Road in the little upstairs theater at the Wooster Group. And actually, first I was working with Richard Schechner, and Richard Schechner was still working at the space, which was called the Performing Garage. And at that point, Richard was working independently from Liz LeCompte's work. So there were kind of two different groups working together. Mm-hmm. And I initially came in with Richard, and then I just found myself always sitting in on Liz's rehearsals. And pretty soon, I just made myself available, started doing whatever. And slowly started being a part of the work. So it was a day-to-day, very organic thing. And it was a very poor theater. And it was a very living month to month, knowing not how long we could keep going. But the good part was we had a space. And no matter what happened, piece by piece, we were always able to keep that space and always had a place to work. So sometimes we had to figure economically out how to keep on going, particularly at the beginning where the work was not always embraced, but we had the space, and that was so, so important. And that's really what kept us together.
And for both of you in the 60s and 70s, the Bert Hoffman School and the Wooster Group were both, I mean, the line between life and art, and specifically theater, they bled into each other. There was no disconnect. I mean, you weren't making much money, and that was where you just basically, as far as I'm aware, spent most of your time, and especially with Bob's group, that you were a collective of a different sort. And I'm wondering if that kind of art and life melding is something that we obviously don't see it so much today, in the way that we go to the theater as this thing at 8 o'clock and leave it at 10, and that's that. But I'm curious about how that experience informed the rest of your work in terms of seeing the two as not being a career versus what you do for fun, or that there's no dividing line between the two.
Well, I never felt that what I was doing as an artist in the theater was part of living. If I had gone to a theater school, I would never be making the kind of theater I'm making. And it happened by living. I was walking down a street in 1967, and I saw a policeman about to hit an Afro-American boy over the head with a club. And I grabbed the arm of the policeman and said, "Why do you hit the boy?" And he says, "It's none of your business." I said, "But it is. I'm a responsible citizen. Why do you hit this boy?" And to make the long story short, I walked with the policeman into the boy, and it was a 13-year-old deaf boy, had never been to school and knew no words. And I learned that he was going to be institutionalized. And eventually, he came to live with me. And I wrote my first play with him, which was 7 hours long, my first major work, and silent, based on observations of the boy. As far as I could tell, he knew no words. I thought in words. I thought he was intelligent, perhaps highly intelligent. And it was apparent that he thought in terms of visual signs and signals. So that was fascinating. And I started to make notes of his observations, dreams he had, drawings he made, and I then put together this play. I had a factory space in Lower Manhattan, 147 Spring Street, before Soho was Soho, from 1965. I lived in the space, and in that space is where I performed my early works in the theater. So living was a part of making art, and it wasn't something that, you know, I went to an office at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning and went home at 5 o'clock and scratched the dog and watched TV. It was a part of a continuation. So the things that influenced me were by chance meetings. I met in the early 70s an autistic boy that I think we'll see later, Christopher Knowles. And it was by chance I met him. And Chris was at that time at the Odie Heck School. And he organized his thoughts mathematically. And he would type them, he would record them. And it was astonishing to see how he thought. And so it wasn't completely understood at that time, and even today, but he would say, how about that, how about that, how about that, how about that, how about that. Sometimes very abstract words that he would compose, but it sounded very arbitrary. But if you'd look at it, you would see that the organization was like music. It would be a pattern that repeated 4 times, then 3-time variation, 4, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 4, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 4, 3. And there was nothing arbitrary. And it seemed to me that he could see patterns as he spoke. My first play, after doing a number of plays that were silent, was with a text of Christopher Knowles. So these were, it was by chance I met Chris and we got to know each other, and I wrote a play with him. This sort of theater, I later became successful in working in the major theaters throughout Europe and the world. I would have never been able to do something like a 7-hour play with a deaf boy who'd never been to school at the Paris Opera, at the Piccolo Teatro in Milano, at the Schaubühne in Berlin, or Broadway. I first showed the works in a factory space, my space, and where I lived in Manhattan. And then eventually we took them to theater festivals. Theater festivals are, I think, a great thing. That's where my work was discovered. That a work can be seen 2 or 3 times. It's a showcase where your work can be discovered. You can, it can be a window to the world. international theater festivals so we get some idea of what's going on in the rest of the world. I think that was one of the things that once I began to travel was so boring about Broadway and about the theater in my country, in the United States, is we're so cut off. We have no idea what is happening with the Eskimos, what is happening in Afghanistan, what's happening in Mali, what is happening in the rest of the world. My 7-hour play in silent was discovered in a theater festival in France. It was done 2 times and invited then and was seen in Rome and Amsterdam. And eventually we played 5.5 months with 2,200 people every night in Paris for a 7-hour play in silence. It was discovered in a theater festival. It was written in my loft, a factory space in Lower Manhattan. It was performed by non-professionals. I had a homeless man, a housewife from New Jersey, a factory worker, man who was head of the department of psychology at Columbia University. It was a whole mixed bag of people from different backgrounds.
And that also was part of the 7-day play that you performed in Shiraz, correct?
Eventually, from the 7-hour play, I was invited to create a work for the Festival of Shiraz in 1973. And I did the first production of the Festival of Autumn in Paris, which was a 24-hour prologue at the Opera Comique 50 years ago. And then I went to Iran and performed this 7-day play on 7 foothills leading to Persepolis. It was performed outside. We had 586 performers from all over the world. And I worked with local people who lived in the foothills, just outside of Shiraz. They had never even been into Shiraz, this small town. They didn't know that man had been to the moon. They'd never seen a television. You know? And suddenly there was a housewife from New Jersey performing in their backyard.
I believe we actually have a lot of people commenting in the chat from Iran right now, and we're, I mean, to case in point, that my father's from Tehran, and he was mature around that time, and so that festival led to my interest in you, actually, in some ways, and other artists through his experiences. So that, you know, the generations fall down through that influence as well. And I think that's a good segue then to talk to both of you about the sense that, I mean, for a silent opera, as I believe, was it Louis Aragon referred to the Deaf Man's Glance as, or was it in the press, Bob?
Yes, he wrote a letter to André Breton and said he had seen the most beautiful thing of his life, and he hoped that this is what the future would be.
But I mean, where I was leading that towards is that the sense of it being silent is not necessarily purely silent, but with an emphasis on the bodies on the stage is.
Well, as John Cage said, there's no such thing as silence. So when we're very quiet, we begin to hear maybe more or hear differently than when we make sound. Mm-hmm. There's always sound. And so it was, in a sense, I mean, the French called it a silent opera, and it was structured silences, in a sense. It was a way of listening, and it came from the deaf boy. Raymond, the deaf boy, as far as we measured his hearing in decibels, heard nothing in the eardrum. And a very curious thing happened, Charles. One night in my loft in Spring Street, Lower Manhattan, he had his back to me. He was 70 feet away, and I cried out to him, "Raymond!" And he didn't hear me. I knew if I would stamp my foot on the floor, he would feel the vibration and turn around. And then I did a very curious thing. I went, "Hey, man! Hey, man!" In the sound of a deaf person. And he turned around. And he started smiling. And, "Hey, man, how are you? Raymond, how are you?" In the sound of a deaf person. And he started laughing. His body was more familiar with those vibrations of sound than the hearing loss language. But in a sense, Charles, his body was hearing. His body was feeling sound. And that changed my life forever. So there's always sound, as Cage said. And it's, to me, the deafening glance was listening to the silences and the structure of that. And if we listen for a moment, the sounds we just heard will never reoccur again. So the only thing that's constant is change. And it's always changing.
And also then a kind of maybe listening and for the audience, certainly listening to and experiencing the bodies of the actors more consciously than they might if there was a narrative being spewed across the stage in a cohesive way, like we might in a Broadway theater today go. And that makes me, to bring Willem back into the conversation, this idea about paying attention to the body first. And you've spoken about being more attuned to dancers in many ways than to other actors, and certainly to technique and method. And I think it's interesting that with a lot of Bob's exercises and the way that his theater manifests itself, and the similarities with another one of the Brooklyn Rails conversations, Peter Brook, who there was a documentary about Peter Brook's, one of his exercises of the tightrope, of just imagining a tightrope on a rug, and that was the most important thing, and to convince the audience that the tightrope was there and that you were floating, and this consciousness of the body rather than something else that the actor is doing, some sort of psychological truth, as method actors might prefer. And so I'm curious about how you, Willem, in terms of working with Bob and with others, think about the importance, as Bob does, of walking and standing and sitting as being so central.
With the Wooster Group, my experience with the Wooster Group really formed me as a performer. And I think the easy thing to say is it taught me a kind of practicality and a kind of task-oriented approach to things. And also to trust the wisdom of the body. You're not selling anything, you're doing things. And the fact that we were a theater that was made up not by traditional actors, but kind of echoing the experience of many people in that period, they were doing things that they weren't necessarily trained for. You know, painters were making films, musicians were making plays, dancers were, you know, it was all mixed up. So at the theater, there were people that had backgrounds in writing or architecture or poetry or things other than the traditional theater. So we'd get in a room, we'd work with what there was, and we'd try to make something that interested us and tried to express things we were interested in. But for me as an actor, the approach was always doing things. I was no different. In that theater, the technicians were no different than the actors. They were the same. We were making things. We were material. We were movers. That's what I felt closest to. And that was good training for working with Bob, because he's got such a beautiful language that's so refined. If you can plug into that language and you surrender that language and you use that language, it affords you a great freedom inside that structure. And you can go places that you could never go if you didn't have that language. And when I say the language, I guess I mean just series of gestures that almost limit you or channel your energies in a way that you can have a double focus that takes you away from yourself. And that's a beautiful place to be when you're playing between tension and freedom. And with Bob's work, also with Richard Foreman's work, who usually instructs you to perform as if there's broken glass on the stage. There's nothing casual. Through the Wooster Group, I entered a theater that nothing was really casual and nothing was necessarily natural. And now, in retrospect, it strikes me as a strange thing that if you've got the power of the theater at your disposal, why would you do something that imitates life? It's a real imitation. And Bob certainly is someone that really embraces artificiality to take you to someplace else. I don't know whether that's a fair description, but that's grossly, for an actor, that's true. What you see in Bob's shows doesn't necessarily look like life as we know it, casual life on the street. So that's a great liberation. And that's what I responded to in Bob's work, and that's why I liked working with him so much.
And speaking of formalism and the way in which that can free the actor, paradoxically, would you say, it makes me think that the kind of presence then that can, when done effectively, conjure, to use a word that you've used about the difference between theater and film, for the audience as well as for the other actors on stage, I'm sure, that kind of presence that formalism can conjure is that intense emotion is often infused for presence, possibly, or that people might think that some sort of just shouting and emotive performance is more powerful than someone standing in the way that Bob might have them stand, or how he's admired, say, Marlene Dietrich and Jesse Norman in there, and I'm sure you as well, Willem. Do you think that that's true in the sense of what might be more powerful, contrary to what people might believe?
I guess I'm interested mostly in the quality of being there, having an experience where your attention is a super attention, and it's not an imitation of something, and you're not selling something. You're navigating. That's what a inner life of the performance is, navigating a series of tasks and calibrating. And in that experience, it's easy to lose yourself. So then you aren't beating up an audience. You aren't selling something. Something is actually happening that they can share with you if you do it in a way that's sincere and concentrated, I guess. And I guess that's what I'm really drawn to. It's like I've always been repelled by the neediness of performers as an audience, and maybe I am, who knows, but I don't want to be that person, because that's beating someone up. There's no meeting. And it's beautiful when you see a performer that has a kind of grace that is surrendered to the form, and something beautiful happens, and you can project onto them and you can go with them rather than just admire them.
Bob, I think that also speaks to your, both of you, but Bob, your hiring of non-professional actors, that a non-professional actor might have more presence on a stage than someone who went to a drama school and supposedly is a professional and has technique. I read something about a waiter in Iowa, I believe it was, that you noticed how he walked, and then he ended up in one of your shows. And so can that kind of thing be taught to anyone, or is it something that you notice and then bring out more?
I think people are interested in who they are. And if one can be comfortable with oneself and the context of the stage or performing in front of others, then I think that's what's essential, whether you are a trained actor or not. So that I don't know, especially with my early work, I was interested in looking at people, and they didn't have to be something other than who they were. That's what was most important. And then they could become something else or someone else. But I don't know, we go to see Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra, but we're going to see Elizabeth Taylor. And sure, it's interesting to see her as Cleopatra, but so especially with the early work, that people if I could find a situation where they could be comfortable with themselves and they could relate to other people in the front of a public. Also, I was always fascinated by animal behavior. And that's not so much my psychology, as I said, but how does a dog walk to a bird? How does a dog listen when he's walking to the bird? You know, he's not listening with his ears only. His back, his tail, his foot touching the ground are listening. How does a grizzly bear look at you? Kleist said, a good actor is like a bear. You strike first, he'll wait for you to move. So that's, I learned a lot from looking at animals, you know.
I mean, that kind of tension that you talk about, especially with the animal comparison, reminds me of a line of one of your colleagues talked about to advice to your actors, or an observation of your actors, that they were always acting on they're always acting on the edge, and that kind of idea of the edge of failure, and also that goes back to the tightrope analogy of Peter Brooks of play and tragedy, and play and violence, death in some ways, and that palpable tension, whether or not it's in the silence, which is not silence, or the mise-en-scène that you create through light, and the liveness that Willem talked about at the very beginning of this conversation of encountering live bodies. That what is that about? Maybe that's something unique about the theatrical experience, is that there's always this risk of failure, always underpinning even the most precise work like yours, Bob.
As you said in the beginning, every second will always be different, and it's like you're waiting for the toast to pop out of the toaster. You're not sure when it's going to be popping out, and I work a lot with opposition, so that if you know, I want to kill you, or I want to kill you. So maybe the smile is more terrifying, and so it's working with with opposites and counterpoint. And if you put your cell phone on this computer, it's one thing, but if you put a rock on it, it's another. And maybe it's easier to see the rock and the computer together than the cell phone on the computer. So that it's always, you know, what's in back of the words that you're speaking. I say to actors very often, it's the space in back of you that gives you the power on stage. We forget if there's a public in front of you, that we feel that, but it's actually the space in back of you. It's what makes the tension. It's like a bow. So that, every opposite has its opposite. A lot of the way I structure material, which is a time-space construction, is dealing with oppositions. I'm seeing one thing, hearing another, and it's not arbitrary how they're placed together, but it's a conscious construction in time and space.
I think that speaks, Willem, to something I've read in terms of what you talk about of being more what is rather than something else as a substitution for what you're doing. And that would be a method comparison to substituting something else for what is happening on stage, and a kind of presentness of what's happening, and also that embodying rather than interpreting the text or the whatever work it is that you're being presented.
That's just for me. I mean, I find myself when I feel that kind of responsibility to interpret something, it finishes itself. The dialogue ends. The tension ends. You start to build up something that makes you less flexible. The best way you can keep that inner dialogue going, and every performance, you know, you're reanimating a score, and your whole day. The one thing I love about performing in the theater is you wake up in the morning, you know that your day is going to inform what you do at night. And everything goes toward that moment where you have this structure that you're going to fill, you're going to make alive.
And it also speaks to the audience in terms of
rather than expressing a point of view or saying something, you know, it's showing, it's doing rather than showing in its simplest form. That's all. That's all. And as far as why you're out there, you have to serve something outside of yourself, but find your relationship to it. Make it personal and make the stake high. And usually that's why I'm so, not only in theater, but also in films, I'm so drawn to directors, because I like to attach myself to them and try to be an extension of their, I try to embody what they tell me they want to see. And some people, it's always funny, some people find that kind of, oh, well, where do you get to be creative? I find that enormously creative, because your path to try to do that isn't so much about ideas, it's about doing things. And once again, calculating and playing with different impulses. You don't control it. You don't control it, but you're driving. And I love that. I love that contradiction in performing. And what saves you from it just being a big splat or it falling onto your needs too much is you got to go forward with, you know, being, you know, serving a score, serving an idea, serving a scene, serving an action, serving a dance, serving a song. What do you say? Serving, melting into it. you know, becoming the actual fabric of that thing, not standing apart from it. I mean, that's the ideal. It doesn't always happen, but that's what you want, where you disappear, to disappear into something that's better than you can imagine.
And that freedom that you experience, something that I don't think enough audiences are allowed to experience either. And then Bob also talks about the importance, and you've talked about it as well, Willem, today, that the importance of letting the audience have an experience of their own that's not dictated to them through something that's so whether ideological, through its clarity, or through the choice of the interpretation. And I wonder if you think that how the audience's reaction, maybe that's something to talk about over 40 years of working in the theater and in film, that the audience is maybe almost being afraid of being allowed to think, or whether that's because we've been dictated too much about how to think. I don't know.
I don't know. The only thing that's significant with particularly kind of moving into film a little bit, but particularly with all these platforms where you can see films, people look at this massive choice and they want to see something, and they look at it and they think, oh, I like that actor, I like that director, that sounds interesting. They watch 5 minutes of it, they turn off, they go to another one. There's no, their feet aren't held to the fire. They don't get to participate. They control too much. There's too much rewind. There's too much going to get coffee. There's too much answering the phone. And we're trained that way in so much of our life. So the theater is really kind of a primitive and beautiful and essential experience of some people going into a room, and at a certain time, everybody's quiet and something happens. This is still a beautiful thing. I mean, I love it in the live theater and also in movie theaters. The beautiful thing is you're going into a room with a bunch of strangers, but somehow you can actually bond around an experience. Mm-hmm. It's light up on a screen, but something magical can happen. And I felt that sometimes, particularly in film festivals, when you have people that are invested and focused on a movie. Sometimes, the theater can almost elevate with the collective experience.
There's something very different also about watching, say, a Bellatar film or Sergei Peryanov in a theater where you're forced to sit for a take like that, rather than getting your coffee, as you say.
And the rewards are there. I mean, so often, the things that give you pleasure immediately don't sustain you, and the things that are tough and you got to hang in there sustain you in the end. I mean, that's like a mantra for me.
And Bob, you in many ways, I mean, The Life and Times of Joseph Stalin was 12 hours long, Einstein on the Beach 5 hours, Calm Mountain 7 days. That the form, that it wasn't a kind of performance exercise like somebody like Marina Abramovich sitting in MoMA for a set duration of time, that there was a reason to have the performance that long, but that having it that long allowed you, as you say, to lose your audience, which is something so counterintuitive to advertisers, for example. And I'm curious, I mean, the same question to you, whether or not you see audiences being able to lose themselves less today, or are they still resisting? I mean, in America, certainly, I'm sure, to something like your work, but.
There's a need today, maybe more than ever, to provide spaces where people can daydream, when I first started working and making these long productions, I was thinking that there shouldn't be so much difference between life and art, and that you could go to see a play that was 7 days long, so no one ever saw the whole thing. I never saw the whole thing. And so it's like going to a park, and you could go, early in the morning, or you could go in the afternoon, you could go at a coffee break, you could go in all night long, but it would be something always going on. And so that there wasn't so much difference between living and making art. It wasn't something, okay, now I'm going to go see an art event. It was just something always there, the way you can go to a park or sit, daydream, watch someone walking, or have your own thoughts, so that a good actor will always leave that space for an audience to have their own thoughts. I once did Salome with Montserrat Caballé at La Scala. And she said to me, I never give more than 68%. Because she left that space. That's why she could sing so piano. I did the same production with Eva Martin, who was screeching and singing Salome. Montserrat, she held back. And it gave so much space for the audience to have their own thoughts. Shakespeare could never completely understand what he wrote. It's far too complex. That's not to say it doesn't have idea, but it has many ideas. So you can read Hamlet one night one way, and you can read it the next night another way. And so it's something that we reflect on. And even for the author, I'm sure Shakespeare, every time he read through it, he could think about it in a different way. So I think it's that space is what's so necessary. Time for reflection, time to think, and especially today when things are, we live in cities that are very busy, and we've got bombarded our senses by so much, so many things demanding our primary attention, that people began to interface and reflect. And so I think in a theater, to have a theater where that is part of the idea, that one can go and come, one can get lost, one can have your own ideas. A great actor will allow that space. And one thing that's wonderful about Willem, to me, as a stage performer, is that I feel he talks to me. If you talk to everyone in that room, it's one thing. But if you speak to one person, you'll get everyone. Because your presence has a focus, your voice has a focus. And it always helps if that person is a child. And so if you're Medea and you have to murder these two children, and there's a child in the audience, how do you do it? Never forget that child. The child sitting in the public. Speak to that child. The tone of voice, the space. This is going to be a terrible event. I'm going to do this murder. And there's a child there. How do you do it? The dark needs light. So as soon as you put the white paper in front of the black shirt, the black is blacker because of the white paper. So put in your darkest moments light. And Willem has this great gift.
the performer holding back a little bit is perhaps in a way so the audience can, as you say, surrender to what they're being presented, and in a way that's not
the audience and the performer. It gives you a time to have if you're saying exactly the same thing every night, you're doing the same movements every night, it will always be different. So even though you're repeating the same words and this more or less the same timing, it'll always be different. So it gives you time also to reflect. And so that's when you have a genuine dialogue with the public. And most actors, to me, very often in the theater, they're like bad high school teachers. They're lecturing you. They're telling you what they think, and I've got to figure out what they're thinking. But to have a real dialogue with someone, hold back, and then you have a genuine dialogue, exchange with them. And you're allowing them, in a sense, to participate.
I think that reluctance to allow them to participate stems from some sort of insecurity or fear or
all of those things. Yeah.
Willem, do you have a thought about?
Oh no, just you mean from the performer's point of view?
From the yeah, both, but I mean specifically from the performance point of view, maybe.
It's the old story. It's showbiz, people pay and you got to give them something. It's transactional, mm-hmm. And you got to show off your wares. That's the classic, showbiz thing. The show must go on. You got to give them something, something like that. When I was listening to Bob, this is kind of getting off track, but I always like to share this. Bob is a great performer. Many people know that because they've seen him perform. And when I worked with him, I used to love to copy him. He'd show me what to do, and then I'd copy it. And when I tell people that, they'd say, "Really? Isn't that kind of oppressive?" I'd say, "No, I love it." The truth is, you can't repeat anything, and you can't copy anything. When he says nothing, everything, every gesture is always kind of reborn. I feel that very deeply, particularly when you have an articulate score that you can navigate by. But one of my favorite things to do, Bob's about twice the size of me. He's a big man. I'm not so big. And he used to do gestures and dance and do all kinds of things. And I would just try to copy him. I'd try to put him on my body. And that kind of mirrors also that thing that I said about directors. I like to try to, the creative thing for me is going towards what they're seeing and trying to be that. I think when I don't serve my own agenda, it's fantastic. You go places that you didn't imagine you need or could foresee. Always take someone else's point of view and it'll lead you to a place often that is better than anything you could come up with. And when you have this discipline of being an actor, you get lots of opportunities for that. And of course, there's the parallel to, you're representing, you're representing a character. You have to realize them. You have to express their point of view. But this is one thing that I like very much. Getting away from yourself and really looking for some sort of shift. It's usually done with learning something new, because when you learn something new, it kind of makes you a new person. And then you have a shift of how you think, and then you get behind that. And you feel that new personness and you can apply it to what you're doing. It's like when I did film with Julian Schnabel about Van Gogh. I didn't think about Van Gogh. Of course, I read his letters and things like that. But the most important thing was I started painting. And not only did I have Julian guiding me, but also I started to have a relationship with that painting, one that I could never had if I hadn't really entered into really painting. So it's always nice. Once again, it gets back to that task, that root. Keep it rooted in something practical and something that you can actually exercise. Exercise, and then with practice, something arises.
I mean, Bob, actually, one thing, speaking of painting, because you're also a draftsman, and back when you were a student, I read that you seemed to care more about the action of your hand moving on the canvas than it was the thing that you were creating, the painting on the canvas itself. And so again, that brings back to gesture and a kind of.
I think, Charles, that I was growing up, I was a very awkward, withdrawn boy in Texas that didn't really relate to most of the people around me, and I was ill at ease with my body and insecure. And luckily, when I came to New York and eventually had this loft I got in 1965. It was 100 feet long. I started making drawings. I took rolls of paper and put it on the floor, and began to make drawings that were 40 feet long or whatever, and moving. It was like, and it was there actually. I began to get confidence in my body. By dancing or moving, and whether it was with paint or with charcoal or graphite or whatever, I learned a lot about my body, the weight of my body, and how and eventually in working in the theater, I mean, that's with other people, how everyone's body is so completely different. And the weight of their body and being comfortable in that body, whatever body they have. I often feel that when I see an actor, or even if I go to ballet, which I don't really understand the classical ballet, but I think, wow, their weight is not in the body. They're not grounded, and I think I learned something about my body, the weight of my body, about grounding myself, how to stand on the floor by making drawings and painting.
Which is, again, I mean, both of you take more inspiration in many respects from outside of the theater, and that's something that I mean, the art schools and the drama schools might not be advocating as much, would you say?
No, there's no way to learn. Some people learn best if they go to Yale Drama School and they study, or they go to Juilliard. And some people learn other ways. There's no one way to learn anything. So some people, through formal education, learn. Some people learn better, in a free environment. What I think is essential, what I've tried to do with the Watermill Center is you learn by doing. And you can talk about it all you want. And that's what I find so often, that in schools it becomes too intellectual. And that, so it's better to get up and do something. You can read a book about how to walk, but you've got to get up on your 2 feet and learn to walk. And you learn to walk by falling down. You learn to walk by walking.
that goes back to what Willem, you said about being a maker as an actor, and being, you know, somebody who is the same as the technicians and anyone else as part of a group. I mean, do you have any thoughts in terms of the point of diversity of education, I guess, in terms of what the actor?
I don't know, because I didn't have that experience. I had an odd experience. I didn't have a traditional path, and maybe I don't have a traditional, you know, working life. I don't know. You know, it just strikes me that formal education, its goal is to get you work. And how can you train someone, in my case, for a work that he doesn't even know what he wants to do yet? I mean, the interesting thing, when I hit New York City at 22 years old, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow. It was, you know, I wasn't thinking about career. I was thinking about stimulation. I was thinking about being in a room with interesting people. For me, formal education wouldn't have probably been good, but other people, it serves them well. I don't want to, you know, everybody's different. That's what's wonderful about, that's the bad news and the good news, particularly in the States, that there's no uniform way of studying performance or acting. You know, particularly in the theater, but even more so in movies, you know, the range of how people got there is pretty wide. And I like that, because it does represent different points of view and different approaches. And I think you always have to suit your approach to the people around you and to the project. You have to, that's one of your big jobs, is to make yourself, you know, tolerant and receptive and curious and flexible. Those are the most important things. One thing that was beautiful about Bob when I worked with him, he really works with what's in the room. You enter a room, he sits there silent for a long time. Everybody gets nervous. What's going to happen? I think it's a little bit of a trick, but it really works well. And then we start slowly doing things, and we build something. We create a history, and we create a relationship with the props, with the objects, with the space, with his voice, with the things that we're trying to do. I'm with Bob on the, you know, you just got to do it. But the problem is, many people don't know really what they want to do, and they opt for a career, and that's understandable. We all do it to various degrees, but it's sometimes they study for that career, or they even do things to prepare them for something they, in the end, really don't want to do.
Maybe as the last question before we open it up to the audience, that for Bob, to draw from what you both were just saying, the sense of giving people freedom because everybody's different and everybody's body is different, that one of the things that I think makes you stand out from your peers is going back all the way to the work you did at the Goldwater Hospital with the patients in iron lungs, creating a theater piece that with people never would have thought possible to create a theater piece with, which maybe you could briefly explain. That so much of what we see in terms of stories about, you know, whether it's the elderly or the disabled or the deaf or the paralyzed, is about how those people are becoming successfully like a quote unquote able-bodied or normal or middle-aged person, rather than having their way of seeing being presented and to change everyone else. And I'm curious how you see the importance of not dictating to others how that, you know, that they should be feeling or thinking, but allowing that openness of new ways of thinking, that by paying attention to the people that people don't pay attention to specifically.
Well, it was in the mid-60s. I went to work at a hospital where they were 50 people in iron lungs, artificial respirators. They were in these tanks that were, I always better can explain by drawing, but you had a tank like this and a plug that went into the wall. And these are people in quadriplegics that were in these tanks, just their heads sticking out. And I walked in and thought, oh my God, that's the future. Those people can't get out. You know, they can't pull the plug. And there's this artificial respirator. And most of the people, these 50 people in this ward at Goldwater Memorial Hospital, were catatonic. They didn't speak. So I was hired as to encourage people to talk. And they had teams from NYU medical school and people studying and approaching them, trying to encourage them to speak. And what happens, you have a man who's 30 years old. He's married, he's got 2 kids, he's in a car accident, and the result is that he's paralyzed and he has to go into an artificial respirator and was told he'll be there the rest of his life. So his wife comes every day to see him in the hospital, and after a couple of years, she comes 2 or 3 times a week, and after 5 or 6 years, she's got her own life, and then maybe she goes once a month or something. These people get very cut off. And so I found different techniques. I'd say, what is this? Is this a banana? And maybe you'd get a little smile or something like that. It wasn't a banana, but, and I began to find ways to create dialogues with the people. But there was one man who never spoke, and there was almost no reaction. And after about a year, 2 years working at the hospital, I said, Mr. Brown, I'm going to be leaving, and it's been very nice to get to know you and to spend time with you. And so he spoke to me. It's a shock. I never heard him say a word. And he said, Bob, I'm really okay. And I've accepted this way of living, and it's a way I'm going to be the rest of my life, and it's okay. And so he had found a piece of living without speaking, and that was a shock. But another big shock was 2 other things, and I'll stop, is that I brought in animals, and it was amazing the way the animals could relate to the patients related to the animals, and not to the medical team from NYU. But I guess the most shocking thing is that one night, I was there at 10:30 at night, and there was a cleaning lady in the ward where I was working. And she was talking to the patients, and the patients were talking to her. This black lady, cleaning the floor, had a dialogue with these catatonic people that we had, the doctors and people studying them all day long, recreational teams. And here was this cleaning lady that had a dialogue. Wow. No, I went to the head of the hospital. I said, you won't believe it. Go there at 10:30 at night and see what's going on. And I said, we should put her at least on the recreational staff. 65, and she was making $60 a week. Well, she didn't because she didn't have a degree. She didn't have an education, to be on the recreational thing. Anyway, it was an incredible experience to be in a room with 50 people in tanks and iron lungs. And, the communication that was going on. Willem, I brought in 67, I think, shortly before, I brought in Otis Redding at Christmas. And I made mobiles over the head of these tanks. And Otis came and sang with Carla Thomas. And they had strings attached to their mouth to these mobiles and moved them. So the room was dancing. Not too many people know that story. But it was a great moment. So a couple of months after that, his plane crashed and he died, Otis.
Thank you for sharing that with all of us. I think that was a nice moment that encapsulates both your democratic and I think humanitarian approach to life, and as well as theater, and the bridge that you have collapsed between the two. And so perhaps we could go to, I know Phong, I believe, of Phong Bui of the Rail might have a question, or anyone else if there's time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charles. And thank you, Robert and Willem, for sharing your reflections on your histories with theater, and also for speaking so thoughtfully about the forces of pleasure, attention, restraint, connection, and your methods of learning in art and life. We have a couple questions from the audience that I've compiled, and then we'll move over to closing remarks from Phong. Firstly, we have a question from Luke Leonard. Hi, Bob. I think you once said that Martha Graham told you, if you work long enough, eventually you will find something. I'm curious if you have always been able to articulate your intentions, or if your intentions evolved over time. And knowing how hard you work, wondering if you and Willem have advice for artists about both establishing and sustaining an artistic career, especially in relation to today's digital spaces and social media, and trying to survive as an artist in the time of COVID. This also relates to a question from Logan Reese-Halwas, who's just asking about how Zoom and the kind of regulation to keep apart from fellow actors and fellow, or to convene in theatrical spaces, how that's affecting both of your practices.
I'm sorry, what simply is the question?
Maybe I could summarize it in a quick, that Martha Graham once told you that if you work long enough, eventually you will find something, and how that might relate to surviving it as an artist today, and people thinking about establishing and creating an artistic career with COVID and otherwise, maybe.
Well, I think just go and you do it. Maybe I go back in the 60s, we had no money, we performed in our lofts, and I hear people saying, we don't have support to make theater, we don't have money, everything costs so much of it. Go on the street and do something. And there's always a way to, I once, many years ago, I work with delinquent kids from Latin America and North America and the Hemisphere Fair in San Antonio, Texas. And it was supposed to be underwritten by the Rockefeller Foundation. And we were supposed to have materials to build sculpture, to paint and do whatever. The monies never came and we never had the materials. So they were going to cancel the program. I said, we're going to do it anyway, you know? And so you go to a junkyard and you find materials, you know? You think that you need a hammer and a nail to put two boards together. But, you know, you can drive the nail with a rock, or if you don't have a nail, you can tie it together with a vine from a tree. So that I think it's important just to go and to be able to do something, and we need now more than ever the presence of artists working. Artists are the diaries and the records and the journals of our time. If we go back 5,000 years ago, what did we look at? Artifacts, what artists are doing. And if we go 5,000 years from now, if anything exists, we're going to be looking at what artists are doing. So it's important that artists have a presence in society. And what will remain in the future. You know, they will be in the diaries and the journals of our time. And, no one's going to care 5,000 years from now about the Donald Trump or the political situation here. That's what's going on today, but they might be looking at what artists are doing. Look at any civilization, whether it's the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Chinese, the Mayans. We go back to artifacts of artists. And so it's important that we support them. But if there's no support, keep working.
Great, thank you. We have one more question. Gonzalo Coutrim remembers that last year in Lisbon, Willem gave advice that a young actor should try to exclusively be around people that they want to work with. How do you both develop partnerships in your careers, and what has made for the best collaborations?
Just real quickly, I'll say, when I said that, I probably thought of how much I believe in apprenticeship. And it kind of goes with the last question a little bit, that, you know, don't look for a better situation. Look at what's around you. Don't wait. Don't procrastinate. See what's around you. See what you like. Go towards it. And even if you have this idea of what you think you should be doing, go there, get close to it. The closer, the better. And soon something's going to rub off on you. And you'll either insinuate yourself into that work, or you're going to learn something that's going to repel you from that work and go to another one. So it's all about, it goes back to the previous question. It's about trying stuff out and really going for now what you want, and assess practically what you can do, and then practice. And then you lose yourself in the practice, and sometime you'll wake up in another place, and then step by step. So I think that's what I was referring to. Just get close to the things that you love.
I love what you said, Willem. You practice. And that's what I love about working with you. You're always practicing. You never learn anything. You can start to Mozart when you're 2 years old and 82, and you're still learning to play it. But you know, it's practice. Martha Graham said in her autobiography, the first line, she says, "I am a dancer. I learn by practice.
Great. No, thank you. We're now going to hand it over to our artistic director and publisher, Fong Bui. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, William. I just want to follow, you mentioned about artifacts, the record of our time. I just remember when a friend, a terrific conceptual German sculptor named Wolfgang Leib, he was making this incredible wax room for the Philip collection, maybe 2012 or 13, I don't remember exactly. But during the production, the German embassy hosted him. It was very polite, invite over the embassy with the curator, mutual friend Klaus Ottman. And they came in and he said to Mike Wolfgang, he said, normally we only have reception for politicians, businessmen or economists and so on, or from big, German companies, etc., etc. Culture is only considered our hobby. And Klaus was a bit reluctant to answer, but Wolfgang didn't. And he basically said, listen, culture is not a hobby. This wax room will survive Barack Obama, who was sworn in that year, the beginning of the year, and many presidents after him. So I just felt that it's very harder. It's getting harder because when I came to New York, the generation where you describe, William, where dancers were making movie, experimental film, when painter was making sculpture, everything was mixing up. Similarly, you just described too, Bob. And I realized that it was fleeting me, the late 80s. And I realized by definitely 91, when the Cold War ended, it was finished. So it wasn't easy to find any community where you can be part of exactly what we describe as counterculture, whatever, the bohemian way of life, where cross-pollination was encouraged. People didn't have to feel restrained or constrained about their aspiration. But thinking, you both say very profound thing. I wrote down quite many. But Bob, you say it happens by living. It's a very Zen condition, the way to perceive life, really. And William, you say surrender to the form. And that's true thing is what artist is really there to do, to activate that being surrendered by a calling. So, this is what we're trying to understand. I know that you have the Watermill Center, which is terrific. I remember gone there to see Tone Polizzi, Installation, Bob. So beautiful, the way it was installed among and between object and between space, within the space. It activates that space, exactly what William was describing in the room, where you all were sitting in silence and let things emerge through that silence. So it's very hard. It's a very challenging condition now, where we are now, because there's no that community anyway. But that doesn't mean we're not gonna do anything. I mean, a good example is the Brooklyn Rail. We activate the space where we allow that cross-pollination. And that's where we hope we can welcome more younger voice to feel connected. Because one thing that you say about culture that I appreciate, you have to pass on the baton. You had to pass that on, like you have been passed on previously by people you met with the, living theater, Jonas Makers, all these remarkable people. We actually about to have Yvonne Rainer come in to join us. So that's I deeply appreciate for both of you making time to be here. And lastly, we're very excited, Bob, William, because the end of the year will be becoming partner with Theater of War.
Okay.
And I think we're gonna do great things together. And so I don't have any particular question. I just simply want to say thank you so much and grateful to you, your work. And as the Willem de Koon in the painter once say, for milk to become yogurt, it needs culture. So thank you for your culture. Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fang. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending lunch with a poem. We've carried that into these community events, and today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Annabel Lee, to the stage. Annabel Lee is a poet, publisher, prose writer, translator, filmmaker, musician, educator, editor, typesetter, printer, bookbinder, and artist. She is the publisher of Vehicle Editions and a member of the board of directors of the Poetry Project, and was formerly on the board of the Center for Book Arts. Annabel will read one of her own poems and a poem by Christopher Knowles from his very own Vehicle Edition. Annabel, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's truly a great honor and most auspicious and serendipitous to be part of this event. I'm wearing my publisher hat now, and I want to mention just another book that I published, which is Train Ride, which is in the Brooklyn Rail family, you might say, reprinted last year by Ted Berrigan. And this is a book that I published, which is called Typings, and it was written by Christopher Knowles on typewriters. I'm going to read this piece. I will show you what the piece looks like. It is a typed work. I'm going to read the whole thing. I think it matters. These are the days. Would it get someone for the sailboat? It could get those, for it is. It could get the railroad for these workers. It could be a balloon. It could be Frankie. It could be very fresh and clean. It could be. It could get some gasoline, shortest one. All these are the days, my friend, and these are the days, my friend. Would it get someone for the sailboat? And it could get those, for it is. It could get the railroad for these workers. It could be a balloon. It could be Frankie. It could be very fresh and clean. It could be. It could get some gasoline, shortest one. All these are the sets days, my friends, and these are the days, my friend. Would it get someone for the sailboat? And it could get those, for it is. It could get the railroad for these workers. It could be a balloon. It could be Fred Jangles, Frankie. It could be very fresh and clean. It could be. It could get some gasoline, shortest one. All these are the days, my friend, and these are the days, my friend. Would it get someone for the sailboat? And it could get those, for it is. It could get the railroad for these workers. It could be a balloon. It could be Frankie. It could be very fresh and clean. It could be. It could get some gasoline, shortest one. All these are the days, my friend, and these are the days, my friend. Would it get some wind for the sailboat? Q. And it could get those, for it is. It could get the railroad for these workers. It could be a balloon. It could be Frankie. It could be very fresh and clean. It could be. It could get some gasoline, shortest one. All these are the days, my friend, and these are the days, my friend. Would it get some wind for the sailboat? And it could get those, for it is. It could get the railroad for these workers. It could be a balloon. It could be Frankie. It could be very fresh and clean. It could be. It could get some gasoline, shortest one. All these are the days, my friend, and these are the days, my friend. Would it get some wind for the sailboat? And it could get those, for it is. It could get the railroad, these workers. It could be a balloon. It could be Frankie. It could be very fresh and clean. It could be. It could get some gasoline, shortest one. All these are the days, my friends, and these are the days, my friends. Would it get someone for the sailboat? And it could get those, for it is. It could get the railroad for these workers. It could be a balloon. It could feel Frankie inside. In it, if it is a balloon inside into. It could get some gasoline, shortest one. All these are the days, my friends, and these are the days, my friends. Would it get someone for the sailboat? And it could get those, for it is. It could get the railroad for these workers. From Iran, iron, into a very fresh and clean and foggy and soggy, and the gasoline, shortest one. All these are the days, my friends, and these are the days, my friends. Would it get some wind for the sailboat? And it could get those, for it is. It could get the railroad for these workers. It could be a balloon. It could be Frankie. It could be very fresh and clean. It could be. It could get some gasoline, shortest one. Oh, these are the days, my friends. And these are the days, my friends. I'm going to read two poems. One is extremely short, and it has a lot to do with when Willem said, remembering indelibly a theater experience. I remember indelibly hearing Bob Wilson sing in 1969. It will never leave my memory. I have heard him since then. He is an extraordinary performer. It went straight through the eyes, through into the brain pan where the light lives. Sax. Show me the primitive forest, Montreux. Monkey blood runs through me. Animals walk in my shoes. And this last poem, I'm thinking of the dogs in The Life and Death of Marina Abramovich. Willem Dafoe was fabulous and the play was extraordinary, but those two dogs who paced in a funerary way. I wrote this poem on November 16th, last month. The day Lucky died. Everyone is in such a hurry to die. Fast drivers, jaywalkers, in broad daylight and the heat of November sun. The dog smells death. On my lap, his ears flapping at the car window, his nose wet, his heart beating, his almost blind eyes squint. So alive, so warm and frail, my deaf companion. This is the end, my only friend, the end. His 15 fierce years times 7 is 105 for a human, 15 small pounds. 10 brick steps by the waterfall. His last morning, he chose that climb, the little show off, his desire to impress me, my perfect match, a rescue. He loved the poetry forest, off the leash, in the moss, all dogs go to heaven. Normally, we can't calculate time of death. Medically assisted, there's a bizarre schedule. That present moment stands in sharp relief to this fuzzy now, this future that contains the absence, his life, a fragment of time become memory. Today is tomorrow, too busy, too preoccupied, too caught up in the furious pace of lost time. A shot for sedation, then the lethal injection. The breath stops. The heart flutters no more, nevermore, a corpse with lammy hair, the color of bone. The mystery wraps its darkness over the dog who was lucky, death all the way down. No room for distraction when death summons, bereft, wailing, yowling. I join every woman who ever mourned at a bomb site, a funeral, a crime scene, post-bleak. The dead direct our lives. In the essence of time, what it is what it is, according to the Ministry of Emergency Situations. We'd examined gnarly tree trunks that revealed previous visitors, faces in the bark, roots tying knots overlap and ramble over a scant allotment of earth. Fallen leaves carry the history of a lifespan now ended, tossed in the wind, their crisp scratching brushed away with the dust of shriveled mushrooms and remains of sticky candy wrappers. Here is the scenario of the crime. Thrusting himself forward, his body shivers, then shakes, then thrashes the victim in a violent frenzy, in for the kill, a murderous, gnarling, thrashing killer bite. Lucky was lucky he didn't penetrate the solar plexus, the heart, the lungs, aggressive recklessness. If I'm against the death penalty, why accept the execution of an animal by lethal injection? Is physician-assisted suicide humane? Does a good death cause no pain? What moral compass? Whose ethics? Jesus, wash these sins away. Grief counseled in advance, the vet's reminder, we can't enter his mind. That history of violence, a take no prisoners firing squad immediacy, his viciousness, my liability, living in pain, trauma, and fear. He survived life's bruises, damaged. A dog's misery, heart-wrenching. That rasping grandpa coughed from deep in the hips, his feeble legs splayed, fawn-like, a skull face with marbles for eyes, his piglet spots and odd sorts map. He'd moan in the tiny Polar Plus nest. That walk that was too fast. A hip got dislocated. The little guy didn't get angry, only whimpered and allowed me to massage his leg back into its socket. An intervention, one choice, death to the dog. A being that is alive, an inscrutable decision. He was in a category all his own, my moral condition, an archetype so flawed. A Buddhist monk cooks up beef and bok choy, honors the animal. That cow also died with prayer. Tibetan wisdom says lucky will find some light after life. No, Lord Pendleton said never cut off the bruised part of bruised fruit. Discard the whole. I'm not so fussy. That brown, less tasty part won't kill me. That bruised part of imperfect perfection in subtle ways, self. Nothing born except with the promise of death. That secret ritual, always preparing for others to die. You have to let go of who you were to navigate those waters. Death around me all the time. Stay with us, doggo. You're always welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annabel, for that reading. And everyone, please look through the chat to find out more information about Annabel's work. Thank you so much to Charles, Robert, and Willem. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. This was a great conversation, and it will be uploaded to YouTube shortly if you care to rewatch it. This October marked the Rail's 20th anniversary, and we'll be celebrating all the way into 2021. Please consider making a year-end contribution to keep the Rail and our special projects free, relevant, and independent, like the new Social Environment Lunchtime series and our We the Immigrants project. Every amount matters to us, and our goal is to double last year's participation and reach 500 donors. Check out the chat for more information or ask someone with a Brooklyn Rail in their username. Thank you again to everyone who joined. And please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for our 17th Radical Poetry reading, curated by the poet Rosa Alcalá and featuring political poetry read by Susan Briante, Giovanni Singleton, Carmen Jimenez Smith, and Anna Maria Hong. I'm going to unmute everyone so you can all say goodbye on your way out.
Bye, Willem. Give my love to Gianna.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so
Charles.
much.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Willem.
Thank you.
Wonderful
Thank you,
conversation. Thank you.
Bob and Willem.
Thank you.
Hi, Bob.
Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you, William.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was amazing.
Thank you. Obrigada.
Tack så mycket.
Thank you. 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 Willem. Thank you.
Bye.